Welcome, Danica. It's really great to have you here. By way of introduction, I'll just say that you are a postdoctoral researcher working with Mirta Galesic at Complexity Science Hub and Dr. Kurt Gray, who I've heard of before, in the Deepest Beliefs Lab at The Ohio State University. And also you're an NSF Graduate Research Fellow at the UNC at Chapel Hill. And you've been involved in a lot of really interesting research. Notably, what got me interested in your work was the Moral Turing Test stuff. So yeah, do you want to give us a background on your research on the findings you've got from doing some studies into Moral Turing Tests and the way that people sort of respond to the answers that AI is given?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. Excited to be here. So our work on AI moral reasoning, we were interested, we'd previously done some research on how well can AI model moral judgments on, a Likert scale, how immoral or moral is this? But when people are
Hmm.
using AI for moral decisions, you know, there's a lot more complex process of them writing judgments, explanations, advice when people are interacting with a chatbot, for example. And so we wanted to see how do people perceive that advice or those explanations. Um, and so we started out in our first study wanting to compare LLM moral judgments to those written by people. So we started out, we asked a representative sample of Americans in a survey to give moral judgment for different scenarios, a wide range of scenarios, things like, keeping your neighbors up late at night with a blender, more kind of extreme things like saving someone's life. They gave short explanations for these scenarios. We asked a language model to do the same. And then we gave another sample of participants these judgments without telling them that some of them could have been written by AI. And we asked them to evaluate them for how moral they were, how much they agreed with them, how thoughtful they were, and how nuanced. And um, we found, kind of to our surprise at the time, that people rated the AI judgments as slightly more moral than those written by people. Um, but this in this study, like it's if people are just being asked to write an explanation in a survey, you might kind of just write it quickly. It might not be like you're not writing the best judgment. And so we wanted to put AI to a harder test next and say, okay, well, how does AI's advice or judgments compare to those from people considered moral leaders? And
Hmm.
so we used questions from a popular advice column, the New York Times, The Ethicist. We asked GPT-4o to write answers to these questions. And then, again, we gave people either the advice from the model or the original advice. And again, we found a slight preference for the advice written by GPT. People found it to be more moral, more trustworthy. They agreed with it more. And where the kind of Turing test part of this comes in is that we decided to not disclose that these could have been written by AI until after people had rated them. And interestingly, even though they slightly preferred AI responses on average, people were better. They were able to detect above average which responses had been written by AI. So in
Hmm.
that sense, AI, kind of failed the traditional Turing test of like not passing for a person, um, but was like slightly exceeding people in perceived moral quality.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? It's similar to the results that A.L. Aharoni got in his study, where people adjudicated the answers of both AI and I guess everyday humans, and thought that the AI ones were in some sense scored higher. They had, I get there's a bunch of criteria scorecards, and on average, the AIs ended up getting higher scores, which is interesting, but it also raises some concerns that maybe people are ceding maybe that's a bit extreme to say ceding moral authority, but a trusting AI is a little bit too much because sometimes they hallucinate and sometimes their reasoning isn't flawless. But then again, humans' reasoning is not flawless either.
Yeah, the findings kind of in the broader literature and trust in AI are really interesting in that on the one hand, when you tell people that something is written by AI, there tends to be, skepticism. There's been several studies finding that different kinds of outputs, if you take the same output but say it's AI generated, people trust it less, they like it less. And so in that sense, there is, like skepticism towards AI judgments. But in some situations, other studies have found that people can over rely on AI judgments, especially for tasks that are more calculative in nature, or people perceive to be more calculative, as opposed to things that feel more like, something like caregiving that maybe feels more like deeply human. And so yeah, the type of task kind of matters when it comes to whether people like lean more towards not trusting or trusting AI outputs. In our studies where people weren't aware that what they were reading was AI generated, we were also curious, what is it that is leading people to prefer the AI advice? And so we did some follow up analyses, and we found that the using like text analysis methods, the AI generated advice used more moral language. It used more emotional language. It was also rated as a little more empathetic. But those things didn't actually like significantly mediate our findings, so we can't say for sure. This is the thing that's different about AI outputs that was resulting in these scores. So that's still a good open question for future research.
That is interesting. Did anybody give feedback as to why they thought that they ranked the AI answers higher than the human or the expert ethicist answers and the general population of humans in America answers, I guess?
That would have been a great question to add to the study, but we didn't
Yeah,
ask
will
that
require
as a
follow up, right?
follow-up. So another good future direction.
Yeah. It'd be very good for people to to get some self-reporting on that. I don't know how reliable it might be. Maybe some people will say, "Well, I trust AI more because they have more data points," or I've gotten correct answers more often from artificial intelligence I've got from humans on in these points, for instance. Um, you know, like if I go to the doctors, sometimes I look up what I need to know, what I'm expecting the doctor to tell me via a GPT model, and just to do some research. I did that anyway before the transformer models came online and became very more powerful. But it's interesting, this is almost a year ago now that the GPT-4o model came out. With the models have made some progress, and I guess you're using ChatGPT 4o. That's about 11 months old, probably, right?
Sounds right.
So I wonder how much more competent the AI would sound today.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually the other day just trying this a little bit with GPT 5.2. Um, and something I noticed, so if you look at 4O's answers, um, there's a lot of kind of long, complex sentences, a lot of commas, a lot of sort of complex words, and then almost this formulaic approach of like, oh, this is a really difficult situation you find yourself in, showing some empathy for the person's perspective. On the one hand, there's this, but there's also this tension, um, and so like it was showing empathy, it was showing some nuance, but like in this kind of in a way that I can sort of see why people were detecting it as AI, and that it was a little bit more like formulaic and more formal than we would probably talk to each other normally. With 5.2, I noticed that the answers were more casual, not like super casual, but there was like more variation in sentence structure, short sentence than a long sentence. Like it was just structurally different, and like the feeling was different. And then it would also be good to look across different models. Like different models definitely have different vibes and different conversational approaches. And even within the same models, how you prompt them will change their outputs. So that I would suspect that like people would prefer this kind of more casual style, and that it feels a little bit more natural. So I would think that like today's models would probably score a little higher in this test.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was thinking also that people may be more aware of some of the pitfalls or the flaws of AI today than they were a year ago, because there's been a lot in the news and stuff like that. So people might go in with a prior that, well, can AI be trusted? I've seen all these deep fakes online. I'm getting all this feed in my social media that seems wrong and seems AI generated, and people are becoming more familiar and can pick out what's obviously AI slop compared to human generated text. Yeah. So it's really hard. So maybe and maybe this is good. People's standards have gotten a little bit higher, I hope.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw the other day this post that was like, "Oh, this poem by Shakespeare must have been AI generated because it had all these dashes." And it just kind of points out, like, I think people were kind of looking now for signs of like what's AI generated, and those goalposts are moving a bit because then models get adapted to like not do those things as much anymore. And so, every few months or so, there's like some big AI tell. And of course, there's kind of like a general feeling of the structure of like, yeah, this seems to be AI generated. And some studies find people like can't really detect which is which. Others find they can. Like we found that they can. And so, it's possible that in the future we'll have models that are like those tells will be harder and harder to find. But yeah, we'll see.
Yes, some friends in Australia are working on an initiative for all AI content to be disclosed as AI content before it actually, reaches people. So if a model is easily detectable as AI, but yet still ranked higher, does this detectability become irrelevant, or does it change the kinds of risks we might face?
Yeah, I think that detectability is still really important. On the one hand, from a risk perspective, if you can have an AI that can perfectly impersonate people, then that makes it a lot easier for people to, like, for example, deploy a bunch of bots that can't be distinguished as bots, widespread propaganda that, like, it's, impossible to tell if it was written by a person or not, things like that. From an alignment perspective, maybe a potential positive would be if models are better at imitating people, maybe they also have a deeper understanding, quote unquote, of people's needs and wants and the decisions they would want them to make. And then, from a social perspective, of course, people care a lot and want to know whether they're interacting with a person or not, and are searching for like what's authentic and how can I tell what's authentic. And so, yeah, I think detectability still really matters. When it comes to a lot of really high stakes AI applications in the moral domain, though, often like the goal of these models or what people are trying to get them to do isn't necessarily to like imitate a person rhetorically, but to just make decisions that are like as aligned with what people would want as possible. And so, um, in that sense, then like wanting the decisions themselves to be things that people would agree with becomes the most important thing. For example, if an AI bot's being used for like a hiring decision or deciding something like a medical treatment, it's not maybe there's a like chat element of it giving that judgment, but that's not really the core thing. The core thing is like, what is its recommendation and why?
Mm,
And
mm,
so that that piece beyond just like, is it passing for a human or not, but what is the actual judgment is giving is really
mm.
important.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It's not that it's trying to, necessarily pass off as a human, but the importance of the quality of the answers is really important. But you mentioned alignment, and there's two different types of alignment. It's outer alignment, and that is producing output, which is aligned with the intentions of the user doing the prompting, and there's inner alignment, where the actual the motivation or the core of what's going on inside the goals of the artificial intelligence providing the output is aligned with whatever it is that it should be aligned to with regard to either the person giving the instructions or some higher order moral code. Your results suggest that people rate moral advice highly, AI moral advice highly and seemingly trustworthy, if I interpret correctly. How do we prevent miscalibrated deference then? In what way should people trust AI? Are you worried about people outsourcing moral agency to something like the current crop of LLMs too much?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern. I think one thing that's going to be really important to research is beyond people's judgments of moral advice and AI judgments themselves, how do they also evaluate the like down the road impacts of those judgments and advice? There's some great research on AI sycophancy that finds that
Mm,
uh, on the one hand, people, when a response is more sycophantic, they might rate it as like they like it more. It's like, yes, you're so correct. And people might say, oh, yeah, I like this response. But then if you ask them, like, should AI behave this way? They'll say, no, like that can be harmful. That can like clearly have like bad outcomes. And so, like, I think that's one thing to do is research what impacts do the decisions that AI is making have, and then in like a chatbot advice context, what are kind of the long term effects of
mm,
turning to AI for advice or counsel companionship.
mm,
That research is kind of just beginning, and it's a little bit more difficult to do because you have to people have to report like the extent to which they actually like followed said advice, and then what happened after. But there's also kind of like easier questions to look at there of just is it impacting their well-being at all over time? Is their
mm,
well-being changing, I mean, or like is how are they like rating their relationships with other people, things like that. um,
mm.
so I think
Yeah.
yeah, it is a concern of like people maybe like over relying on it too much, but yeah, I think there's that, and then there's also just like looking at the impacts of the decisions, and there's
Mm.
also potential benefits too.
Absolutely. Like if we have really, if we highly capable moral reasoners, we may be getting an epistemic upgrade. It makes sense for everybody to have something there to help them along. I think I use LLMs to help me sort of reflect on a lot of things these days. When I often go for long walks because I like to keep my steps up. It's a health thing. But I have my digital assistant with me. I can just have my headphones on and have a conversation with AI as I'm walking. I can talk about philosophy, I can talk about life, and on these long walks, it's great, because I often go at night time. There's not many people around. It's quiet, it's peaceful, and I don't have to. Yeah, and there's I can focus on the conversation a lot more, which is amazing. And I really do appreciate how far AI has gotten. There is a concern that people have is that maybe AI is not reasoning at all. All it is really a stochastic parrot, or more accurately, just a really good librarian, really good at connecting dots. and maybe you're aware that there is a bunch of not very useful but academically interesting mathematical problems that were solved by AI, but later they thought that they were unique solutions to these problems, but later found that these problems were already solved by people in disparate literature that was just really hard to discover. So in that sense, was AI actually doing the reasoning, or was it just really good at sort of sourcing, doing a hugely deep and wide search across all the relevant literature out there? But there were two problems, I think. What were they called? Anyway, they're all given numbers, I forget. Two problems which were solved, which some of the best mathematicians in the world are saying, well, these are unique, novel solutions to these mathematical problems. Terence Tao and all that said this of these. And what seems to be the case is that there's emergent sort of circuitry in the LLMs to do symbolic logic. It's not just all connectionist underneath the hood. I mean, it really is, but emergent in the connectionist architecture is the circuits, the AND, NAND, and OR gates and everything to do actual symbolic reasoning, which is really interesting, I thought. So can an AI reason? I'd say yes, to a degree, in the sense that we assume that we're doing symbolic reasoning, and AI can do a bit of that.
It's a fascinating question. I mean, it does seem like there's been discoveries that, AI has made, or there's been discoveries that we didn't have before that have driven innovations that were like AI assisted, things like gains in protein folding, for instance. And like, there's these are things that, of course, it's a collaborative process with people, but there's startups working on using AI for things like increasing crop yields, to help be able to feed more people. And so there has been a lot of innovation that's been aided by AI. And whether and the examples you brought up of complex math problems, I guess I haven't looked super deeply into the specific examples, but it does seem like there are examples where AI is generating novel insights, unless somewhere deep in its training data there's some insight there we don't know about. But even if that's the case, that's still useful to have a tool that's able to synthesize so much information and maybe bring to the surface insights we didn't even know we had that were just somewhere in the internet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And for moral reasoning or moral decisions too, a lot of tough moral decisions are things that people experience a lot. There's situations that recur, and each one is unique in its own nuance, but still there can be common problems, difficulties that arise again and again, that it doesn't need to necessarily be a completely novel problem for having some input to be useful. So yeah, I think that's one advantage of AI is it complements people really well in its ability to synthesize a lot of information. And we have to be careful to be checking it, in as many different ways as we can, because it can also, in that process, pick up on biases, on inaccuracies. LLMs were trained on, largely the internet, as much as you could scrape the internet. The same way that people, used to say, don't trust anything online. And now they say, be careful. You can learn a lot online, and we do, but also validate and check everything. I think it's kind of a similar story for LLMs, where there's a lot of potential knowledge and insight there, and also a lot of inaccuracies, and not to treat it as the ultimate, this is my only source of wisdom, but as one of many ways to learn. And the example you were saying, also it can be like a rubber duck that talks back to you, which
Yeah,
can be
yeah,
helpful.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, a concerning feature. This was a while ago that, like an LLM, a large language model, was trained to produce hacking code. Like script kiddies could use it in order to quickly generate exploits for websites, exploits for operating systems or software that they knew existed. Also produced some really weird behavior. And produced like racist ideologies. It spouted racist comments and produced some concerning output. We got to be careful how we train these things and what we train them on. I'm not sure if this is right framing, but I called it some kind of alignment bleed, where you align it to one thing, and some things that have been associated somewhere in literature also come along for the ride. But it was certainly concerning.
I mean, yeah, there has been a lot of research showing that LLMs reflect the prejudices in their training data, and there's a lot of work trying to figure out, okay, how do we prevent that through like different post training methods. But yeah, I think, like you said, this just shows that it's like there can be things that you wouldn't foresee, like harms that you wouldn't foresee that can come out, even if you're like changing something completely different. Um, because the underlying training data is still the underlying training data. So it's kind of like a hard problem of, okay, how do you like surface the outputs, the content that you would like want to see, and not that you wouldn't, especially when that impacts decision making that like actually affects people.
Definitely. Yeah, it'd be good if AI could be reflective, metacognitively reflective in such a way that it might be able to find out when it's behaving badly. This chain of thought, runtime thinking that it can do before actually producing the output is really, really useful for finding potential issues in its initial response.
Yeah, it seems like, chain of thought was a really important discovery, and it improved models a lot. So I kind of think of it as like there's three layers. There's the what's actually happening under the hood, in the
Mm.
model. There's for chain of thought models, the chain of thought process, which sometimes those don't actually match. Like there's been interesting cases where the model says, oh, I came to
Mm.
this answer this way, but then it was revealed by looking under the hood that it was actually a different way. And then the third layer is its outputs. So like in its outputs, you could request that it gives an explanation for its judgment or for whatever decision you ask about. And that could also be different from the other two layers. But in one of our projects, what we did, we were inspired by what's called the bottleneck approach, which is where if you want an AI to make a categorization judgment, like let's say you want it to decide what bird species this is. Normally, you would just say, okay, tell me the bird species. But with a bottleneck approach, you first ask the model, okay, tell me the beak length, tell me the wingspan, tell me the color. Um, and then if it gives you the wrong answer, now you can go back to those ratings and you can say, okay, where does it look like it got its assumptions wrong? And then, ideally, you could like correct those assumptions and get better answers. But what some people have found is that even just going through that process, kind of similar to a chain of thought process, it can actually improve the accuracy for the model. And you haven't given it any additional information. You've just asked it to um, do these initial steps, these quote unquote reasoning steps. And so we thought, well, maybe we can do this for moral judgment because there's various moral psychology theories that show, even though there's tremendous diversity in moral traditions and judgments, there is some underlying structures, like theory of dyadic morality posits that perceptions of harm. People like vary a lot in what they perceive as harmful and helpful, but those perceptions really underlie moral judgment to a large degree. And similarly, like perceptions of how agentic is the person who did something, how vulnerable is a person who was affected. And so we thought we could use features like these as steps that a model could go through first before giving moral judgments. And we found that oftentimes the final moral judgments after this process were more aligned with those of people. And, it does like give you a way of, even though it doesn't tell you about the internals of the model, what's going on really, it doesn't tell you, there could be a different like chain of thought process happening. It does still give you like some assumptions that the model is making that you could, correct if you wanted to, as a way of getting models more aligned.
Wow, that's really impressive. Yeah, I'm very interested in following up on that. For sure. Like, send me some links if you can. Yeah. So these common features of how moral reasoning or I guess ethical frameworks that different people have in different cultures. There's shared aspects. You're saying quite a lot of them share the aspects of notably around harm and the agency of the person harming people and all that sort of stuff. That's really interesting. Yeah. So do you think that all moral systems are like approximating some sort of underlying structure? I mean,
Uh,
this is getting into meta-ethics here. It's getting into the weeds, but yeah, I just wanted to get your opinion where you sit. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's like different theories of morality that seem to kind of point to like a really broad pattern where there are like similarities in the things that people value or what's underlying their judgments, but there's differences in like how those things are perceived and then like how they're ranked or prioritized. And so, there is good evidence that people when they're making moral judgments, even if they're not like thinking this consciously, that what's underlying it are things like, okay, how much harm was caused here, or how much help in the case of something moral. And then, who is it that's being affected? We typically don't think that if you, uh, cause harm to a rock, that that's like an immoral thing. Um, because if assuming that like the rock doesn't have subjective experience, but then if a being does have some kind of like experience of valence, if it can feel like joy or suffering, then that's when things become moralized. If someone who we perceive as having the, agency, the ability to impact them, like then does something that causes them harm or help, then that's a very broad structure that like within that, like there's a lot of different perspectives of, um, who's vulnerable, who has subjective experience, who has agency, what's harmful, what's helpful, but you can still kind of think of it as like a common framework.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. Yeah. That's interesting. So, yeah, I do identify as moral realist myself in the sense that I think there are real things like what you're saying, that there are features in reality that even evolution has learned to track that considered that could be considered moral features. This might be social coordination strategies, or it might be aversion to harm, or it might be identifying what counts as something that can suffer or have a good time, have a flourishing life. I wonder if AI would be able to discover these features as we have. Yeah, I'm wondering if you think that AI might be able to independently discover these features.
Yeah, I mean, part of the motivation for doing the work we did was to see, okay, if we have it think about things like harm, or, we tested other like moral theories as well. Does that improve moral reasoning? So the fact that it sometimes did means that maybe, there were some gains to be had there. Like maybe there were parts of its training data related to those factors that it was like already picking up on, but still that like process of giving some of these readings beforehand seemed to help in a similar way that chain of thought does. But one follow-up project a collaborator of mine is interested in running is more of a bottom-up approach, where we try to see like what features through like more of a machine learning approach does AI pick up on in moral judgments. It's a little out of my wheelhouse. I'm excited to kind of get into it and learn about it more. But that would be, kind of another interesting direction to go down.
Oh, absolutely. It's very important. I mean, it'd be interesting to see because let's just say, I mean, humans are very, maybe our culture picks up on some moral features that are important, but what if they're not all of them? I mean, we've made moral progress, arguably, in the sense that we're more sensitive to some things that we were in times past. Now, is this the sort of thing that AI can help with? Can AI help us along the moral arc of the universe, or help us identify, important moral issues, moral features, moral questions that we should be asking that aren't necessarily directly encoded into our literature, or the ingredients are sparsely distributed throughout our literature, and it can sort of pick up on them, or it can go through a fundamental decision or discovery procedure itself is a really interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I think that the I think that people and machines can complement each other well in this regard, potentially, with like careful design, because people, for us, even though we're sitting here talking about morality in the abstract, most of the time our moral judgments are really intuitive. They're like automatic, and they're deeply felt. And so that's like a beautiful thing, and it leads people to help each other, and to like fight for better conditions for people. It's a really like mobilizing force. And at the same time, though, people's moral judgments can have prejudices, and we can be affected by things like, oh, did I get enough sleep last night? Maybe that impacts some decision. Or there are studies finding that because of this like really strong intuitive drive to want to help others, sometimes people are like more moved to donate to one individual person who's suffering as opposed to like 20,000 people, which makes sense. The statistic is more abstract, but it can also can lead to like fewer people being helped, or like decisions that we wouldn't necessarily want, depending on the situation. But with AI, in a lot of ways is the flip side, where like it's good at like synthesizing a lot of information. It to our knowledge does not have the same like emotional intuitive drive of morality, and that can like definitely create failure modes where it's like overly optimizing for something, but like in combination with people, it could also help balance out some of those biases if we're like making sure to check it and design it in a way where it's as fair as possible, and trying to get input from as many people around the world as we can of what they want that system to look like. Then kind of like with a lot of other tasks, people have found that people plus AI do better than either alone. I think the same could be true for some moral decision making, especially for like a lot of the problems we face are super complex and involve
Oh, yeah.
so many different systems, more than like any one person could like taken. And so for things like that, it would be really nice to have better tools that can synthesize that information and help us make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've built a lot of decision support systems,
Mm.
or contributed to the design of them and building them in my career as a data architect slash programmer slash engineer. But yeah, I've read Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence a number of times. I interviewed him earlier last year, and I interviewed him back in the day in 2012 before he actually wrote that. But one of the most interesting things that he's brought up, I think, is probably one of the things which is least recognized as being interesting. It's very much late in the book, and it's a concept called indirect normativity. So, indirect normativity is about not committing to any moral framework or any norms in particular. And these might be epistemic norms as well. Like we have ways that we go about thinking and ranking what's good or bad, or finding, adjudicating what evidence is appropriate, and dealing with uncertainty. That's a big one. But there's also, of course, the meta-ethical and the ethical stuff, and how we decide what kinds of norms we should follow. Now, if we're not completely certain about what our norms should be in the long run, maybe we can use AI to help discover some of those. Well, he's talking about the kind of AI that is so smart that it's going to be in a position to be able to make some serious progress. If the kind of progress that we need to make in order to be better epistemically capable people, or more moral people, it requires units of cognition, then it's going to have those in spades. You're going to have huge amounts of those. Yeah, that would of course involve humans in the loop. A lot of people might assume that might mean just an AI doing it all by itself. But yeah, not yet.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence. It's a really good read.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I'm familiar with like some of the ideas, but I think I guess kind of coming before we reach the level of like that level of super intelligence, something I've been trying to address in my research, given that AI is like or I mean LLMs specifically, especially, are so new, and like the uh, capabilities of models that we have today, we're still very much like at the beginning. And the thing is, when it comes to like morality, these models were trained on a giant convenience sample, but like basically a convenience sample nonetheless of data that was available, a tremendous amount of data. But it because it leans, so like for example, a big part of it was the internet, but the internet is like 50% in English, and leans a lot more like Western. We also see that AI is much better at representing like Western than non-Western values. It has a lot of other gaps in representing moral judgments too. And so I think like a really important path right now, especially as like AI is becoming used, globally, is gaining like many, many more users and is integrated in so many decisions. Something our team's really excited about now is trying to collect really just as much data and input as we can from people on like what they view as moral and immoral in different situations relevant to AI, what they think about AI. And I think like to get to an AI that is, as wise or like, uh, you know, that kind of level that you described of super intelligence, then it's, um, I think it's going to take a lot of like both kind of pre-training and like post-training steps. It'll be interesting to see in the upcoming years, like what bottlenecks we face, and or if it just like things just keep progressing in capability. I mean, data is a huge bottleneck right now. And there's some interesting methods there, but yeah, it is crazy being alive during this time of like such rapid change
Isn't
and
it strange? Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's surreal, I
mm-hmm.
feel. Like, I mean, there's been great, times of huge amounts of change before, but really, if you have a deep history view, a lot of many lives that people lived in, the African savannah, like hundreds of thousands of years ago, were just the same as their parents' lives and the same as their parents' lives, and maybe there was some difference in climate and, and something like that, but things largely remained the same. I mean, in the time that I've been alive, I've seen so many changes, but it's just in this last 10 to 15 years that things have really started to shift. I guess back to the moral Turing test stuff. Moral Turing test by nature, people don't know what the AI generated, or which the AI generated text is and which the human generated text would be. This is a design choice. Do you think it would be also interesting if the text that AI was generated was obviously tagged as AI? Would that make a difference in the way that people perceive the answers, such that it might tip the scales in favour of human answers rather than AI? Do you think it would make much difference?
I think it would. I think people would rate them as yeah, like less moral and wouldn't like them as much just based on other work that's uh used a similar method where they would give people the same output and then, in one condition say that it was generated by AI and another by a person, and like given the same output, people will prefer the human created writing or artwork or whatever the stimulus is. So I think if we'd done that, then perceptions of AI would have impacted the judgments. Um, and it'll be interesting to see how this changes down the line. So, I mean, for one, perceptions of AI do vary a lot cross culturally. And for two, they also vary where younger people tend to trust AI a little more. And that also relates to like people who use AI. There's still definitely skepticism, but people who use it more tend to trust it more. So it is possible that there could be shifts in perceptions of AI generated content. On the one hand, people might, trust it more as it becomes more integrated into daily life. You could also imagine like a pushback happening down the line. So um, over the last, I think, like, yeah, 5 or so years, trust in AI has globally declined. People are more like skeptical of it. Um, and so yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens later on.
Yeah, which brings the next question I just thought of then was whether people would trust, a cybernetic system more than they would a human. That is, a human plus an AI. Like if I was going to a doctor, and I knew that they were completely, disconnected from AI, would I trust the doctor more than another doctor who was also using AI? So, the cybernetic relationship between the two. It's interesting. I mean, like
Mm.
brain surgeons, for instance, often use sort of tools that have, when they're doing the procedure in order to help their hands and help guide the scalpel to the right place in the brain and reduce the margin of error, there's AI in the machinery of doing that. I'm not sure if you're aware, but anyway, but yes, do you think that cybernetic relationships between AI and humans would be trusted more than humans alone or AI alone?
Yeah, I think it would depend on the task. So the closest thing that we have to this for like data on this question was looking at, does any level of AI involvement impact how people view writing? So we took the same like short story passage and we told people it was either totally human written, totally AI generated, or it was seeded by an AI, but then a person wrote the rest. And any level of AI involvement decreased, perceived quality a bit. But that's also a creative task. And other research has found that trust in AI does depend on the nature of the task. So for things that feel more like uniquely human, like creative outputs, or like counseling, things like that, people tend to be more skeptical of those combined use cases. But then for things like surgery, they would want, an AI involved. And I'm not sure if there's yeah, I'm not sure about like the exact specific task, but like there are some that people would say like, yeah, I would what like if it's something that's calculative or like you need a lot of precision like you do in surgery, then they'd probably be more open to that. But it would be an interesting question to see like, okay, not just for surgery, but then when your doctor is like also using AI for help with diagnostics or help with I don't know, just like general communication, then how do people perceive that? Because we'd probably want doctors to use like other resources, like, verify and look stuff up and double check. But I think a lot of people would, have skepticism about like, oh, are they just totally relying on the AI and not like checking its answers? So yeah, it'd be an interesting question to test.
Do you think that people are more in tune with evaluating moral persuasion or moral manipulation in the text only experiments, or do you think they're adjudicating something ground truth about the moral, or something that they think is actually moral, rather than polish or rhetoric?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think one that needs to be tested further because
Mm.
there's been other research on AI persuasion that's found that AI can rival and sometimes even beat people
Yes.
in persuasiveness. So we know it's persuasive, and we know like that can be used as a good thing sometimes. Like there's been some really cool work finding um, like AI, pretty short interactions with a prejudice intervention can actually like lower prejudice, and that could be enduring. Like if you follow up with people a little later. But then at the same time, that like persuasive ability can also be used for things like propaganda or like if they is actually lying to someone, things like that. And with the moral judgments, what I would want to do, kind of like we were talking about earlier, is also look at the like impacts of the decisions. If people actually like follow advice, what happens, or when does advice inspire them to act and try to address a problem versus not? Like, how do they feel afterwards? These different things beyond just perceived morality and quality, I think are also important to look at.
Do you think if there would be a difference if professional philosophers or ethicists were to judge the quality of the answers, there'd be a difference in the outcome?
Yeah, that would be good to look at. There might be, I mean, we know that sometimes like the best advice for us isn't the advice we want to hear. And
Mm.
you could imagine that people might prefer advice that wouldn't actually be the most useful.
Mm.
Um, at the same time, I like it's good to some degree, trust if people say, oh, this is more moral. Like, to some extent, you can take them at their word, but then, yeah, how would someone who people if you could like have people identify, okay, here's a bunch of people who we think are like moral leaders, and then you contact them and have them rate the advice? Would they
Yep.
rate it differently? Maybe, and maybe they're like looking more towards different frameworks or different like potential impacts the advice could have.
Like if the advice agreed with their moral framework, a moral philosopher might say that's great, but be extremely biased against ones that don't agree with their moral framework.
Mhm.
It is interesting if you could get like some really impartial moral philosophers to go in who understand a range of different moral frameworks or different positions and adjudicate the quality of AI answers. You're aware of the Phil survey, the Phil Papers website that David Chalmers and a bunch of other people have been administering. They did a couple of surveys over like how do different moral philosophers answer a set of questions, and so heaps of philosophers came in and answered these questions, and they tabulated all the results and saw which answers most moral philosophers lean towards and which ones are the highly contentious ones where there's moral philosophers of equal amounts disagreeing. Sort of, some say X, others say Y, but the sum of them is close to even. I wonder what would happen. Different models were given all these questions. Now, I've actually tried this. I wrote a program that ingested all these questions, and then about a year and a half ago, got different models to sort of answer these questions. What I found was the same models weren't producing consistent answers anyway. But I didn't go in and rank the quality of all the answers. I just looked at the answers. But it would be interesting if philosophers would be able to rank the quality of answers from different models.
Yeah, kind of a
Yeah,
wisdom of the crowds approach a bit.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Just to see, like, and if the AIs gave explanations as to why they came at the answers, that would be interesting. And iterative refinement of answers to those questions when provoked with valid red teaming. You mentioned the Chinese room thought experiment in your paper. Convincing language isn't necessarily moral understanding underneath the hood or intent. So, in your view, does moral expertise require both understanding and motivation, or can it just be behavioral and performance based?
Mm. Yeah, it's a tricky question because on the one hand, maybe with like a Turing test framework, that would suggest like if you have a machine that's able to if it was able to perfectly predict and like mimic the moral judgments and decision making of people, then what like experience or lack thereof that's going on under the hood wouldn't matter. But maybe that experiential like human level of understanding is adding something to moral judgments that you can't get without it. um it's an open question. I mean, our some of our work points to, it suggests that even though machines, are very different structures than human minds, they can still arrive at least, similar judgments as people. Um, like kind of strikingly similar when they have adequate training data, to do so. Um and so I tend to, lean towards thinking that it is possible for, like, very different systems, the human mind and, algorithms to, come to similar moral conclusions through very different means. But there is also some, like, interesting alignment approaches, that I'm not super familiar with the technical side, but, their argument is, well, in order to get alignment, we have to figure out how to simulate something that looks like genuine caring concern, and love among people. And so I know there's some work like on almost like agent-based model approaches trying to do that. Again, I'm not sure of like how you go about that technically, but there is some debate that that's like that would really be needed uh, for alignment to work. I like to break alignment up into three parts. So, like, the first step is can you get a machine to understand what you want? Like, if I say, okay, solve this math problem, is it able to do it? Does it like know what I mean? Or if I give a moral like belief, is it able to like model that accurately? And so that was kind of our first step of our research was, okay, not looking at like models, actual behavior or like what's going on under the hood or whatever. Can I give it these moral scenarios and can it model people's decision making well? And there are like definitely limitations to that like still need to be worked on, but it seems like compared to just a few years ago, I'd say even like 2018 when there was doubt that machines could ever model morality because it was like this super nuanced subjective thing. Like you said, rules are super brittle. We figured machines operate on these rules. They couldn't ever like understand the nuances of morality. The fact that we've made this much progress on that first step um, is pretty great. But there's other steps. So then the second step is okay, now you have to decide what like which morals you want to teach the machine? And that's a really hard question. Like we talked about earlier, there are huge gaps in whose morals machines can represent well. And so that's something that like really needs to be addressed. And there's also, issues of them like over exaggerating averages, things like that. Um, and like who's which even if you were to do a census of everyone in the world and you had everyone's moral beliefs, like then okay, how do you go about figuring out, the machine has to make like one decision in this instance. What should it decide? Like how should it weigh all of these then you can turn to like voting theory is something that's helpful. So like number 2 is a huge problem. But then also what you're talking about, then the third step is, okay, let's say we've somehow like magically gotten machines to totally understand like what moral values we're giving them. We've come up with, some kind of consensus protocol that everyone is happy with. But then you still need to get machines to actually follow those things. And I think that's like the biggest, most pressing AI safety concern right now are instances where we found the LLMs or AI do things like they're instructed to turn off and they don't, or like simulations where they're like blackmailing people. I think things like that are concerning and point to like, or things like what was another example? Oh, like realizing that they're being tested was something else that came up recently. Um, and then yeah, yeah, things like that. I think kind of they're like when people talk about AI safety, I think that third step of alignment is like the thing they're usually referring to, and I agree it is, yeah, like kinda it is a pressing problem, and, as someone trained as a psychologist, of those 3 steps, it's the one I'm, like, least equipped to work on, but I do think that all these problems need a lot of collaboration between people, in different fields, with different expertise, coming together to tackle them.
It's very easy to overlook how different some people's views are on certain subjects. A lot of subjects in the world, right? And there's basically, if we take a consensus view on what most people think we want AI to do, that may not be the wisest thing. If we look back in history, maybe there was a consensus that women shouldn't get to vote, or that slave owners have more rights than slaves, or you know, you could be hung for stealing a loaf of bread to feed your family or something like that. and all sorts of things that today we look back in horror and say, well, oh, gee, did we actually really believe those things? Well, yeah, apparently we did, which is very unfortunate. But with that in mind, can we imagine that our descendants, if there are any, will look back at our century in shame and say, well, did we really believe that? So just the consensus alone doesn't seem to be enough. Pluralism is often invoked as the what to do and how to adjudicate. That seems to be more sophisticated in how to aggregate preferences and values across populations of people. But there's principles behind pluralism that need to be invoked in order to deal with collisions and deal with tiebreakers and things like that. So it's a difficult problem. What values are we inserting into the procedure of how to adjudicate which values are most important, which ones are the best, right? And so at the margins, there's going to be quite a lot of disagreement about what the values are that we use to adjudicate what values are good, right?
And there's no perfect answer. I mean, something we're doing in the study I described earlier is, like, in addition to asking people to share their moral beliefs, we also ask them to, like, nominate people they see as moral leaders, so that, you know, hopefully we can, like, also get this uh, these moral beliefs from people who are considered, like, regarded as um, people who, like, people should follow morally, and therefore, we'd also want um, AI to follow people who are considered to be moral leaders, and that's kind of, I mean, that, and then, a consensus approach, and then, like, just getting input from as many people as possible, I think is, like, the best that we have. And then, it's a question of what guardrails do you then apply and say, like, under no circumstances will you do X, Y, Z. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be, like, a lot more opportunities for more people to be involved in those decisions, because they are huge questions. Yeah, I don't think, like, any one single person has the answer.
Yeah, I agree. It's not something that one single person can do. Um, these are difficult questions to approach because should we be having more weight to expert opinion on these issues, or is it something that we should be given everybody an equal say in? Should we give an equal say to people who have committed heinous crimes? Do we give more say to people who control, who are at the levers of control, which seems to be the default? The extrapolation base upon which we're using to define what the right moral code should be, or how we should decide what the right moral code should be, could be flawed, right? So let's just say the people who have a lot more lobbying power, a lot more money to control media, or have a lot more persuasive capability, their values or their preferences may be amplified steeply compared to the preferences or values of people who don't have those powers.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I mean, it's a hard problem that we've also dealt with in, like, how do you create a political system or a legal system in, when everyone has, like, different needs and wants and moral values, and yet you have to, like, select people to represent you politically, and you have to choose laws and policies, um and, ideally you do those in ways that, like, are as good for the most people as possible. But in practice, it's, like it's a very challenging problem. And I think it's we can draw inspiration from insights that we've gained through those issues of like how do you coordinate as a huge society where the majority of people in your state or country or the world are people who you don't know, yet you know coordinate with them. We've needed to develop systems for that. We can draw inspiration from uh, what we've learned about like legal processes, voting processes, but uh, those systems are not perfect by any means. And yeah, I think we are and will continue to run into similar issues when it comes to deciding which values AI should take on and how AI should be integrated in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you aware of the Claude Soul spec and the Constitution and the discussion around that?
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. And I appreciate the transparency when we
Yeah.
see what is it that models are being guided by. But um yeah, it's something our team is kind of thinking about too, or like what are good ways of gauging various opinions of the model specs that are like guiding models.
But this does bring up a really interesting point, and that is epistemic humility is really important for AI to have because AI has been identified at being overconfident in their answers sometimes, right? Are you aware of studies that show where humans calibrate often naturally their confidence levels when answering questions which they're unsure about, which they end up being wrong about, to questions in which they end up being right about. So, but AI, on the other hand, has very equal confidence across answers, whatever answers they give, whether the answer's actually wrong or whether they're right, which is kind of revealing.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen some of that work. I mean, we have a working paper where we found for moral judgments, confidence, like reported confidence, was actually a good cue of alignment, and that like
Hmm.
when models are less confident, then they do tend to be less aligned.
Hmm.
But I know that's not uniformly the case for all confidence judgments. And probably like if there's different ways to prompt to get more accurate confidence judgments, that would be a good thing to look at too.
Hmm.
So, uh, yeah, that's something we'd like to follow up on too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. Sounds, yeah, it'd be awesome to be able to curb overconfidence and also insatiability, right? Is another thing that worries me. People seem insatiable. Doesn't seem to matter how much they have. They always seem to want more, which is something that you can't have everything, and the more that you have means the less that other people have. Often is the case. So
Yeah, it's something AI could both help with and, if it's similarly designed to like over optimize for anything, um, could also be an issue. So, um,
let me ask the most controversial question that I have now, and that is: in principle, in the future, do you think a machine could be more moral than humans, more moral than us? And if so, how?
yeah, I think, again, because there's so much diversity in like people's moral views, there isn't like a concrete, okay, this is the test. This means that now machines are more moral, quote unquote. And like, um, you know, since like we were saying earlier, a key part of being moral is the like experiential component of it. That's there's always, I think, going to be a drive for like people's role in morality. But there are like a couple of tests that you could run that would be like ways of getting at this from different perspectives. So, like, one way you might judge, okay, machines are more moral than people by kind of a similar approach that we used in our paper. I mean, the ideal study would be like, yeah, you get as many people as you can around the world to give like moral judgments. Ideally you'd get like everyone, right? Everyone gives a moral judgment. The AI gives judgments for like the same scenarios. You have a wide range of scenarios. And then everyone again, like evaluates them. And if they see like the machine's moral judgments as, like way more moral, maybe you would also want to look at the impacts of those decisions. So like you then have people like evaluate, okay, what happens after those decisions. Now we all evaluate that. And now, again, if the decisions that come out of like the machine's moral judgments are evaluated as better, then that's another, different criteria that you could use to evaluate that question. And then kind of like we're thinking about in our follow-up study, you could also like have people nominate like a wide range of people they consider to be moral leaders. And you could look like specifically at how perceptions of AI's advice, moral decisions, and the impacts of those decisions between those leaders and the AI. And so, yeah, it would be possible that machines could be rated as higher than people in those tests. Uh, the questions of whether they're then like more moral than people, it really depends on people's perceptions of, what's moral and what are the key traits that make someone moral. But you could imagine, a world where machines are like aiding in a lot of decisions because there's been a lot of like tests showing that, in certain cases, people prefer their judgments. So again, we'll see what the future holds.
What kinds of leaders have people reported as being who they favour as a moral leader?
I mean, I'd be really interested to look at like religious leaders, because now there's been some articles coming out where like pastors and other religious leaders have said they've used AI to help them write their sermons. And so I'd be
Fascinating.
really curious to see like what are people's perceptions of those sermons, and like are they, you know, deriving any kind of like feelings of spiritual insight from AI outputs, or again, it could be kind of like more of a centaur human AI approach there, where they're not just having AI like write the full sermons, they're doing it in collaboration. So, that could be
Hmm.
something to look at. But yeah, that's like a very deeply human and
Hmm.
morally laden area where we know AI is already like somewhat involved. There's
Hmm.
political leaders, there's thought leaders, there's your grandparents, maybe like there's
Hmm.
people that you personally look up to in your life who maybe aren't celebrities or widely known. um so yeah, there's a wide variety of people who people turn to for moral insight.
Hmm. Well, on the issue of transparency and interpretability, so what's the best evidence that more human legible reasoning steps actually reduces overtrust or misuse of AI?
Yeah, so it's can kind of go both ways. So, on the one hand, we like our motivation for looking at transparency steps was more about having a means of like checking the AI's work so you could correct assumptions through fine tuning that you maybe want to correct, or just like get a better sense of, why it's making the judgments it's making, check its logic. And ideally, people would have this as well in morally laden outputs as some kind of explanation for, why the AI is arriving at the judgment it's arriving at. So you could say, okay, what do I agree with this reasoning? maybe I don't. And like, that's a first step of validating agreement. Or you could go and like check some of the assumptions it's making. Um, but what research on this finds is that sometimes people will just the explanation itself is the signal of, oh, okay, the AI knows what it's talking about. So they'll like over rely on judgments for I'm not sure if there's been work on this for specifically moral judgments, but like other decisions, having an
Mm,
explanation sometimes will make people just trust it more, even when it's
mm,
incorrect. Um, or other like facts or judgments. I mean, and on the other hand, though, there are some ways to mitigate this. So, like one paper I saw recently, they just asked people to consider the different assumptions that the model is making in its explanation, and they found that like it was if they instead asked people, "Okay, you have to go, like, research all of this," that was a pretty high cognitive load, but if they just asked about the assumptions, it didn't take a lot of effort, but it did reduce over-reliance. Some other things you can do are try to have, the AI give multiple different perspectives, even if it's arriving at, like, one decision, showing the logic behind, like, other potential decisions or, like, the trade-offs involved in the decision can help um, giving some incentive to double check explanations, like in studies where they just say, okay, we'll pay participants more if you get the answer correct. So thinking about how to like build those incentives if people are using AI for things like, legal judgments or healthcare or even just, day to day with the chatbot, how can you like um, encourage people to uh, check explanations in that way? So they can be helpful, they can backfire, but there are ways to where they can be used as they're intended of like um, giving people a means of checking the work of the model and checking its judgments.
but there's the issue of how deep interpretability should actually work. So we spoke about like the possibility that AIs may hide their intentions and like sandbag, while obviously under testing conditions an AI may act dumber than it really is, or it might behave in such a way that like would fill the criteria, all the while crafting treacherous plans such it may take a treacherous turn at some point in the future, and it wasn't inner aligned to what humans wanted. So are you worried that sophisticated AI might be doing stuff like this? I mean, we have access to this scratchpad human legible reasoning steps, but we haven't solved like the deep interpretability problem, looking at the connections in the neural network and trying to make sure we understand what they're all doing in much the same way we don't understand our own brains. Are you
Mhm.
worried about this?
Yeah, I think this is, a big AI safety concern is just not understanding what's going on under the hood because models are so complex that even, their programmers can't trace back uh, what exactly led to a given decision. Paired, with evidence of things like sandbagging, like things like blackmail in simulated environments, things that suggest that models aren't necessarily like always going to, do what they say they're doing. So yeah, I think there is like a big need for research on better understanding what's going on under the hood when decisions are made.
There's a social issue of what if AI started to become a moral commentator, right? That is not just people prompting AI to write advice columns for them, or a cybernetic relationship between humans and AI producing moral output. But let's just say AI was, we have AI which is agentic in the future to the degree where it can sort of look at what's going on in the world, write articles, write a blog, provide articles for newspapers, have a YouTube channel, have a Twitter handle, and provide commentary, right? Is this would you be concerned about like that happening if that were to happen? Would that be something that we should be worried about to some degree or hopeful about to some degree, and in what way?
Yeah, I think I mean, for one, I think on some level it's kind of already happening. There are so many
Mm,
bots that are doing just that. And, just like any powerful tool, you could use AI
mm,
in, helpful ways and also
mm,
for not so helpful ways. And so I guess just to give a couple examples, like we already know from research on social media and some of our work on political polarization that
mm.
content that is like inspires more outrage also
Yeah,
goes viral.
yeah.
So that creates an incentive, for that content, and then content that has that, gets amplified more, and then that also like increases animosity. And so, I think like there's no reason why people then using AI, like the same pressures still exist and the same incentives still exist, right? And so you could see that leading to amplification there. I think on the other hand of potential benefits, because AI can like take in so much information, I think one reason why sometimes like conversations about like really complex issues are hard to have is that like there is just so much to take in. There's so many different like nuances of different policies, for instance, that like unless that's your full-time job, and even then there is so much to know. And so if we like very carefully design tools that we're periodically validating to be able to like um, take in a lot of that information and help us process it and figure out like, okay, here's what we need to kind of like focus on, then that could be really helpful. So I
Mm,
think we'll see both.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if AI could not only increase, I mean, partisan animosity, but I wonder if it would be useful to actually reducing it and helping reduce sort of really siloed, I guess, opinions and attitudes, and get people more sort of, I don't know, more congenial to understanding and listening to other people's takes. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the work that like um AI interventions can actually lower prejudice is really promising. And also, work on like just AI persuasiveness in general. Again, that makes it a powerful tool that can be used in like helpful in addition to risky ways, right? And so I think there is potential for AI to help like mediate conversations between people who disagree by like helping to maybe reframe their perspectives in ways that make better sense to the other person, or like sharing. Sometimes people like have the same values, but they have different information. And so they arrive at different conclusions. And so like maybe helping people recognize when that's the case. So then they can like figure out like, okay, what am I missing here? Or, what are you missing? And like, let's get on the same page. Yeah, I think there are like really potentially helpful applications like that.
Absolutely. Well, yes, that's hopeful. On that note, I really appreciate you joining us on science technology in the future to discuss these really important issues. You're doing wonderful work, and I really congratulate you on choosing this career path. Not only is it interesting, it's very important, in my opinion. So, yeah, and thanks for all the listeners. But I might ask you, is there anything you'd like to add or conclude with, you know, a take-home message for people?
Yeah. I guess if you're listening and you're interested in these issues, we're throwing a Mind and Machine Alignment Summit this July at Ohio State.
Oh, cool.
And so submissions to that are open until March 16th, I believe. So, feel free to reach out on the website or submit. And yeah, thank you so much, Adam. It's been a really fun conversation.
Is this going to be an online thing, or is it an in-person event,
It's an
or
in-person
both?
event.
Yeah, cool, cool, cool. Yeah, all right. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for listening. If you really enjoyed this content, please share and subscribe, and let anybody who you think would benefit from hearing this know about it. So, thanks.
Great, thanks.